So when we think October, we think the movies that everyone's talking about. Obviously, there's all these scary movies. So what are we gonna do?
The Hunt for Red October, the scariest of them all.
Yeah, obviously. So this is a movie in the Jack Ryan series by Tom Clancy, who's a pretty famous military espionage writer, and done a bunch of research about this sort of thing. That's why he's famous for it.
Obviously, Jack Ryan, while not the most successful, is action hero of all time. He is still incredibly influential, and with all of his movies grossing around 800 million in total.
Yeah, it's very interesting to me that the Jack Ryan series never really caught on because I think these books have very interesting premises. They're very realistic in a way. Obviously, they later on they end up going a bit crazy. But I think most of these are solid movies. I'm kind of interested in why they didn't take off.
One of the reasons that I think they didn't take off, and you can see a lot in this movie, is Jack Ryan, he really isn't the typical action hero star. Now, he does become it in later iterations, but I do think that kind of threw people off. I actually much prefer this version of Jack Ryan, where he isn't this ultra elite man, where he just has an instinct and he risks almost everything on it.
Yeah, this movie is made by John McTiernan as well, and it was pretty successful when it came out, making 200 million.
What a star-studded cast as well, though. Sean Connery, Alex Baldwin, Scott McLean, Sam Nielsen, and James Earl Jones, just to name a few.
She's the Red October, the latest Typhoon class. Captain's name is Ramius. He's nearly a legend in the submarine community. He's been a maverick his entire career.
Once more, we play our dangerous game against our old adversary, the American Navy.
Apparently he has suffered a kind of mental or nervous breakdown.
Now you want us to help you hunt him down, kill him.
This thing could park a couple of hundred warheads off Washington and New York.
Ramius might be trying to defect.
I'll give you 3 days to prove your theory correct.
I am not field personnel. I am only an analyst.
You're perfect.
Open the outer doors, firing point procedures.
I'm gonna blow him right to Mars.
Give the man a chance.
My orders are specific, Mr. Ryan.
I know Ramius.
He's defecting. You're willing to bet your life on that?
We sail into history.
So we open up with a premise, kind of bringing us back to the Cold War period whilst it was still ongoing, and it straight away, sets up the alternate history that we're going to be witnessing. So then we see Captain Ramius on the submarine, the Red October, and from his gloves and coat, we can tell that this really is the Cold War.
Then we get introduced to the primary character, Jack Ryan.
And we see straight away he's not a very cool guy, where first off he's just going about his work and we don't really know what he's doing. Then we see him get on a flight and he's really nervous the whole time.
It very much paints him as the underdog. Then he meets up with his friend Greer, start talking about this new submarine which they got pictures of, and they start theorizing on what it could be.
And James Earl Jones plays the character very well, where we get the idea straight away that these guys are, longtime friends and they kind of look out for each other just through their interaction.
We also learn about Sean Connery's character's nickname.
The Russians call him Vilnius Nastavnik, the Vilnius schoolmaster.
Which I think is a very cool nickname, but they do not use it at all throughout the entire rest of the film.
As well, it shows straight away, without saying much, that Ryan knows a lot about Captain Ramius. Straight away it foreshadows the fact that he's not Russian, and which is obviously a very important point in the movie. But then we're introduced to the USS Dallas, and we see Seaman Jones, who's running the signals there.
And Dallas almost becomes the second location.
So then we transition back to the October, and we see Ramius go in to receive his orders with the political officer.
They both receive the orders, and then the political officer wants to reveal the orders to the crew.
Yeah, and we see here with how, quickly he makes a decision. He's got to kill the political officer. First off, he's had this plan for a while, but secondly, we can see how different he is to Jack Ryan, who, will hesitate later on in the movie a bit. Ramius as well, at this point, is a bit of an enigma. We're not sure whether or not he's a villain or, where he stands. There's this ambiguity.
And almost to compound on the ambiguity, he takes the nuclear launch key, so he has sole power to blow up any part of America if you so wished.
So then when we see Ryan and Skip Tyler speaking in the engineering facility, we understand the stakes of the movie.
After the scene happened, the Red October completely disappears from the Dallas scanners.
And obviously it turns out the thing that would end the Cold War in one go is just the main actor from Bonzo Goes to Bed.
And then Ryan goes back to General Greer. They end up going into the director of the CIA's meeting.
I think it's a really powerful scene as well when we see Ramius explain his new orders that he's created to the crew. And we see how happy they are all singing the national anthem at the idea of being able to spend a week in Havana.
And this actually comes back to bite them in the ass later, as that's what got the Dallas to pick up on their signal.
And as well, I kind of like the metaphors and, the imagery that Ramius uses when he's describing their mission, trying to glorify it to his men.
We play our dangerous game. A game of chess against our old adversary, the American Navy.
And this really does show how great of a captain he is. He's able to turn the men against the Soviet Union by playing on their affection towards the Soviet Union.
I think Sean Connery is such a great choice for Ramius because straight away he's got this authority presence, and as well he's so charismatic as an actor.
And while people do have the criticism of him not having the Russian voice, I think his sheer stage presence overturned his lacking the Russian accent. And I think they make a very effective use on which they transition from Russian to English.
And the seventh angel poured forth his bowl into the air, and a voice cried out from heaven, saying, "It."
It's so natural feeling that I'm sure a lot of people didn't even realize that they weren't reading subtitles anymore. And as well, it's kind of cool fun fact that they changed on the word Armageddon, which is the same in both languages.
We see the Caterpillar engaged for the first time, and the Dallas losing all connection towards the sub.
So then we see that Ramius had sent a letter to the commander of the Red Fleet.
And what I think was done very well in this scene was we actually don't learn what was in the letter. And we almost think at this point that Ramius is going to start World War III.
And then when we see Jack Ryan go in to report this to the CIA, we see straight away, he never expected to be delivering this meeting and he doesn't think he's capable. How we see again Greer looking out for Ryan where he says he's a direct man, he asks direct questions. I like that Pelt is a politician who's a reasonable man and, he just wants to do what's best.
Such a great line with,
Listen, I'm a politician, which means I'm a cheat and a liar. And when I'm not kissing babies, I'm stealing their lollipops. But it also means that I keep my options open.
I really like the scene then where Ryan realizes that Ramius might be planning to defect because I think it's a very clever solution, and obviously it's very cool that Ryan goes into this room, he has no one's respect, and once he makes this realization, he's able to get Pelt's respect, he's able to shock Greer, and obviously then this is the point where the audience is able to understand that he's a very smart person and he's a creative thinker. And as well, I do like for the Ryan characters that he can't keep this information to himself. He has to shout it out in front of the room. And I think that's what makes the Jack Ryan stories so interesting, is that Tom Clancy is able to put out these very, innovative, but also sort of realistic scenarios. And then Ramius announces to his officers with the letter, they know now that there's no going back.
But what I thought was a really good was when Ramius' second in command, he got all the officers out of it, and then he confronts Ramius, and he says, "I would never doubt you in front of the crew, but," and we can see how loyal and how smart the second in commander is.
Yeah, and Baradin and Ramius' relationship is very good in showing us that they're both together in this ideal of escaping the Soviet Union. And we see here as well that the captain of the Dallas as well is a very competent man, where when Jones tells him that he's found a sub, he believes him because he looks at the evidence and he trusts his man. And it's another example where, the characters in this movie, they all do their job and they know what they're doing. And it's kind of funny the bit where he's talking about how
The worry is the Americans. We meet the right sort. This will work. We get some buckaroo.
And then we transition to Ryan again being terrified on a plane. It's also interesting here is that the Admiral's able to give him the practical side of how you'd go about a mission like this. And, tell him that his line of thinking isn't exactly perfect. And we see, you know, he's an analyst. He's not exactly a field man.
And then we see the Red October going to Thor's Peak. And then we learned that the sub is now being sabotaged.
I quite like this scene because it shows that Ramius' skill of handling the submarine when we see him manually doing all these turns, increasing the speed. And even though the rest of his crew isn't sure, we see it, you know, working, and he's obviously acting cool and catches his coffee without looking. Then the ambassador tells Pelt that it's a rescue mission to try and get back one of their submarines. But what I like here is that Pelt's an intelligent person, and so, you know, he listens to the ambassador, but he obviously doesn't believe him fully. And then we got one of the shots where it feels like one of the cooler shots in the movie to me, when Ryan's hanging over on this stormy sea, and he just jumps off the helicopter himself to land on the sub. He's also taking the initiative, and he's not a bureaucrat. He does things practically.
I very much like the first Crazy Eye even scene, and it also gave us a good bit of information which will be used later on what the Crazy Eye even is.
Yeah, there's a lot of good foreshadowing in this movie where whilst Ryan's, you know, the protagonist and he's the guy who's in the right, we see he's also disrupting other people's plans, and like, he's not the only piece in this puzzle. You know, the Dallas has to follow orders here, and we see as well that Pelt isn't going to take responsibility himself. He just willingly puts out the hit order on the October.
How he manages to convince the Dallas not to fire on the Red October, that the Red October's going to go starboard.
And as well, like, it's made clear how, you know, fortunate the October is in this story, because it takes one man who is just full of determination, taking such a huge risk anyway with a 50-50.
The Dallas actually informs the Red October that they're here.
And I really like the way Connery acts in this scene, where you see his reaction once he realizes how close he could be to true freedom. I really like the scene where Ramius and Borodin are talking about defecting to the West, and we see Borodin's, you know, got all these aspirations and dreams about what life could be like with the freedoms. And it really shows as well what life is like in the Soviet Union for these people, is that, you know, they can't believe simple things such as being able to travel freely. After the subs communicate, we see that the October's reactor goes into meltdown, and they have to evacuate the crew on raft.
And it's such a suspenseful scene, and we think the saboteur, he's about to just take the entire Red October down with him.
Yeah, at this stage you really are wondering who this saboteur is.
They're really starting to build him up, like build up his presence. But then we learn that there is no saboteur, and it was actually the captain and his officers.
And we see the US frigate here, and we see Greer take over. We do understand the amount of pieces that it takes to make a mission like this work, as Greer is able to, you know, send a decoy missile to make the crew not believe that a defection has occurred. A quote that I really like and feel symbolizes Jack Ryan's character well is when he's getting onto the helicopter and he's thinking to himself,
Next time, Jack, write a goddamn memo.
because it really does show is that Jack Ryan's more like an everyman, like a John McClane type. He's way out of his comfort zone, being the guy who's actually following through on the mission. Then Ryan and the crew from the Dallas board the October, and we see this kind of tense standoff between the two sides, as, you know, they're not sure whether or not they're going to have an amicable relationship.
And I absolutely adored this scene where the Soviet officer opens it. He starts speaking Russian again, and we can no longer understand the Russians, and that really builds to it because there's no subtitles in this scene, so it truly built up the tension as we don't know what the Russians are saying.
And it's nice again that Jack Ryan here is the one who's able to connect the two, but he's also able to break the ice. And Jack Ryan here is able to connect Ramius to the rest of the crew, as he's able to speak Russian, and obviously he has a connection to Ramius, and he's able to make Ramius feel at ease. And you can see here that Marco knows that he's got someone that he can trust, the exact sort of man that he was hoping he'd find on this mission. I also like how Ramius is like, what the hell happened with the torpedo? And we can see here is that, like, the Americans are able to execute their own plans, and it's not Ramius who has full control over everything. He's not perfect. And then the Soviet sub comes, and the element of danger arrives once more.
And to compound that fact, the saboteur returned.
I like when they're, you know, worried about the first torpedo, to kind of ease the stress. We see here that Ramius is talking to Ryan, and he's like, what sort of books do you write? Then when we see that Ramius has read Ryan's book, and it really does show us that, like, the two characters are very similar to one another.
They were going towards the first torpedo, and Ramius was going like, okay, go towards it. And the captain of the Dallas was like, no, what are you doing? And Ryan has to choose. And like he's been doing all movie, he decides to back Ramius, and it ends up working out well for them.
315. Clear right till this reach 315.
No, that's wrong. Ryan, don't turn that goddamn wheel.
315.
I really like how the scene shows like these two brilliant minds coming together who were on the other side for so long.
And then we learn about the saboteur, and then the saboteur, he ends up shooting in at Ramius, but unfortunately hits Baldwin, which was such a emotional scene when he says,
I would like to have seen Montana.
and it also just shows, again, him being one of the best characters in it, being so loyal.
And we see here again where they trust each other, where Ramius trusts the Dallas's captain with the ship. Likewise, he gives Ramius his gun as him and Ryan go down to chase the cook. And I do like as well how the Dallas's captain's like,
Don't just stand there, Ryan. Go with him.
Ends up in a really good scene where the cook ends up firing and hitting Ramius, and so it's now all down to Ryan.
and I think it's an intelligent decision here to have Ryan kill him in cold blood, you know, before he makes a move necessary to connect the wires. He gives an opportunity to surrender, but it really does hold Ryan responsible for the decision, making him again unlike a standard hero character. And obviously there's great irony when Ramius says to him,
Hey, Ryan, be careful what you shoot at. Huh? Most things in here don't react too well to bullets.
Ryan, some things in here don't react well to bullets. Yeah, like me. I don't react well to bullets.
if only someone had been paying a bit more attention to that advice.
And then we see the second Soviet ship firing their torpedoes. I do think they should have made it a bit more clear that the Red October couldn't fire back.
So they're able to escape and the Soviet sub explodes. It's nice to see that Ramius' plan worked of, you know, being able to convince his crew that he had gone down with the ship. So then we cut to sort of an epilogue where we see the submarines brought to a river in Maine, and Jack Ryan and Ramius are able to have a nice conversation where Ramius talks about, you know, what this defection's meant.
I thought it was a great scene, but I do think it was undercut at least a little bit by the green screen in the back. It did look quite distracting. It didn't feel natural.
Yeah, and then we get a satisfying ending where Ryan is able to bring the bear home, you know, when he's on a flight back to live his life again.
Yes, and he's fast asleep.
But like, it's cool that like he's not like going out on the ship or something like a Bond movie, but he's also not like going home in a sports car. He's going on a normal plane to bring his daughter home a gift. Well, no movie's perfect, and so whilst I think this is a very good movie, what are the main downsides of it in your opinion?
I thought the timeline was extremely confusing. They didn't really show the passage of days.
And I think this is an issue solely because some of the scenes are time dependent. This is probably a symptom of being based off of a novel where you can just have the time wrote, whereas you can't really do that in a movie. I think until you see the main characters of the movie, it's not always clear which sub we're looking at.
With the final scene, it almost felt like an anti-climax with the saboteur. How they kept on building him up all throughout this movie, but then they also started breaking him down later on.
It was very strange to me. When I first watched this, I thought it'd be, you know, a mystery to find out who it is. It can be a very nice plot point where it's someone small, unexpected. You can do that well, but the issue is they'd already told us that it was just an ordinary member of the crew. It really does feel like they built it up, then brought it down, and then it just underwhelms.
Overall, I thought it was a very strong and engaging movie. I do think the best aspect of it was definitely the cast. But biggest shout out to Sean Connery, who played Marco Ramius extremely well, and you felt like he, even though he wasn't in command for most of the film, you still felt he was in command.
I really like Hunt for Red October. I don't think it's an era-defining movie, but it's a very good movie from 1990, and one that I think, you know, is very easy to rewatch. The great cast obviously helps that tremendously. I think the Tom Clancy story is also a great addition to this. It's kind of a shame that the Jack Ryan series didn't take off from here, but I think it's a very enjoyable movie, and I can see why it's held so dearly by those who know about it. It was a big success at the time, obviously making $200 million by itself. I think Alec Baldwin gives a very good performance as Jack Ryan. I think it would have been great to see him back again, even though Harrison Ford did a good job. I think The Hunt for Red October is a very good movie for when it came out. You can very much enjoy it for what it is.
It has a simple plot, but that's not always a bad thing. I think a simple plot done well is always better than a complex plot done poorly.
So I got my Lithuanian friend here who's never seen this movie to react to its portrayal.
Yep.
Okay, so you ready?
Yeah, I'm excited for this. There aren't many big movies with Lithuanian characters.
Alright, here we go.
We each have our reasons, Victor.
What the fuck?
les nations